In January of 2023, Chelsea were in a fierce bidding war against Arsenal for one of the hottest players in Europe, who many at the time, I kid you not, were calling the Ukrainian Neymar, Mykhailo Mudryk. Mudryk was making waves around Europe, combining that breathtaking pace, fearless one-on-one dribbling, long-range shooting, and promising youth. I mean, looking at some of his performances, especially in the Champions League, but even in his smaller league in Ukraine, it's easy to see why some would call him that. Pacey wingers with potential are some of the most coveted assets in European football, and Chelsea desperately needed one. So much to the point that they would drop a staggering €70 million transfer fee on top of an additional €30 million in add-ons, just to secure who they believed would end up being a future star for their club. But very quickly, they would find out that that fairy tale was likely never going to arrive. Within the following weeks of his debut, that Chelsea had bought potential rather than a polished product. That lightning pace that once shredded defenders often ended up with misplaced touches, wasted chances, and overall poor decision-making. And with that, each underwhelming performance stacked higher and higher against the 9-figure price tag, and the pressure would only grow. Because by the time he entered his second season, Mudryk was already being spoken of as one of Chelsea's biggest regrets and mistakes. But what's crazy is that the guy who would tattoo the words "talent ain't enough" on his neck might have literally meant it. Because Mudryk would be removed from football altogether when, despite all the memes, lowlights, and lack of results, he would be charged with anti-doping violations. And as unironically funny as that may be, it's actually one of the swiftest and craziest downfalls in football history. So bad that Mudryk might end up quitting football entirely and use his pace to pursue track and field instead. But just how did things end up this way? Why did Mykhailo Mudryk never succeed in the Premier League? Whatever happened to the Ukrainian Neymar? How bad was he really? And where does he go after all this controversy? Well, it all goes back to why Chelsea even spent all that money on Mudryk in the first place. Because although Ukraine's youth football program has never been the most prestigious, Mykhailo Mudryk would arrive carrying two traits that any scout or manager would love: explosive pace and fearless dribbling. And it was that combination of pace and trickery that would elevate him from a domestic prospect to a European curiosity, as he would gain more and more playtime and experience with the Shakhtar Donetsk. And it wasn't simply just the eye test. Both scouting reports and statistical outlets would emphasize his acceleration and one-on-one threat. Notably, FBref shows the data scouts referenced an above-average frequent dribbles per 90 and frequent involvement in the attack for Shakhtar. But the hype also had to do with Shakhtar's marketing for Mudryk and the overall transfer market appetite for a young, high-ceiling, wide-attacking winger. European clubs would keep a close eye during UEFA competitions, and Arsenal's interest in Mudryk ultimately led to the bidding war narrative that resulted in Chelsea ultimately paying a premium for Mudryk. And although the price tag wasn't exactly justified, there was some true hype for Mykhailo Mudryk. Again, seeing his highlights, it's easy to see why some would have called him the Ukrainian Neymar. But perhaps such a high-profile move and expensive price tag ultimately placed Mudryk under immediate financial and narrative pressure. For Mudryk, everything was new, and perhaps the lights were a bit too bright. Because after this move, there were realistically only two options: justify the fee and produce enough to meet the expectations, or crumble and endlessly be judged for it. Now, for Mudryk, every performance was a test. But from the very start, Mudryk's tactical fit at Stamford Bridge was already complicated by managerial and squad rotations, because a guy whose primary weapons are bursts of acceleration and dribbling needs to have a consistent tactical role, and he really needs support from overlapping fullbacks, having a manager that's willing to structure the attack around those traits, and having a lot of space on the flank would really help. However, at Chelsea, the tactics around Mudryk's playing style rarely enjoyed any consistency, because again, Mudryk came from the Ukrainian league. Moving up to play in the higher levels of the Premier League was already a challenge. The pace is fast, the players are physical, and the overall talent level is just higher. Both time and consistency are what Mudryk needed most to fully adapt. But don't get me wrong, across his time in Chelsea, Mudryk did show signs and flashes of greatness. Moments of raw speed, occasional long-range strikes, and the odd decisive contribution. However, his overall end product numbers lagged behind expectations. FBref shows modest goals and assist totals for his appearances, and beneath the surface of advanced metrics flagged a key problem: high involvement in build-up phases and dribbling attempts, but with relatively low conversion in the final third. And these metrics turned an eye-catching skill set into a frustrating run of inconsistent match influence. And with that, two consequences followed. First, selection became more infrequent. Most of Mudryk's minutes and play times came from substitutions. Occasionally, he did start, but there were few long instances of 90-minute play. Secondly, the narrative on social media among pundits got even worse, branding him a player who cost elite money, but delivered limited, measurable returns. Quickly, he would become painted as a bad transfer, and this narrative was compounded by critics both inside and outside the club, turning him into one of the most criticized players in the world. But it is a little bit ingenuous to say that he couldn't adapt to the Premier League at all, because Mudryk did have some injuries and fitness interruptions. In his first season, he would miss a total of 7 matches, with a total of 38 days out due to injury. Plus, there were even reports from club insiders and statements suggesting his relationship with manager Enzo Maresca was rather poor. And all that would definitely not help Mudryk with his already negative view from the media. And this would eventually spiral all the way until December of 2024, when news outlets like The Guardian would report that Mudryk was provisionally suspended after an adverse A sample for a banned substance, meldonium, was discovered in a routine testing. And the FA's process of provisional suspension removed him from competitive and club training activities, pending B sample results and further hearings. The story would go public with clear legal and career implications. Under FA regulations, a finding or use of a prohibited substance could trigger sanctions for up to 4 years, depending on the overall outcome of the hearing. However, not too long ago, media outlets would report that a B sample had also reportedly returned an adverse finding, making it incredibly likely for formal charges, which the FA would end up issuing in June of 2025. And for those who don't know, the presence of meldonium is notable because it's classified as a substance that can enhance recovery and endurance. Basically, it's a substance that's treated seriously. Both Mudryk and Chelsea publicly denied any knowing use, but since then, Mudryk's future in football has become very unclear. Now, the only thing Mudryk can really do is fight it in court, and right now, Mudryk's legal team is engaged with Morgan Sports Law, a firm previously involved in high-profile athletic defense, basically signaling that he and his team intend to fight or overturn a full ban. Because in anti-doping cases, pathways to reduce suspensions typically depend on proving a lack of intent. For example, contamination, mislabeled supplements, or procedural lapses during testing. For example, the Paul Pogba case, where legal maneuvers reduce an initially lengthy suspension, shows that a mitigation strategy might work. However, no outcome is guaranteed. And the FA's formal charges placed against Mudryk is incredibly serious. A multi-year suspension would not only remove Mudryk from club matches, destroy his market value, void or diminish his endorsements, or create long legal fights over wages and contractual status. It could basically end his career for good, because most of the time, clubs can terminate or suspend pay under certain contractual terms. And for a player like Mudryk in his early 20s, basically building his initial brand around speed and athleticism, a multi-year absence would mean the end. Of course, public reaction to this news was swift, because not only was Mudryk already memed for his poor performances, but the tattoo that he got saying talent isn't enough only made things worse. Basically, the doping story finalized his narrative of being a flop, initially around the time when Antony and Mudryk were one of the most hyped players in the world. Personally, I refrained from making a video about them because I wasn't all too convinced. And it wasn't until recently when I started seeing rumors online that Mudryk was about to drop football completely that I even considered making this video. Because around social media, I was seeing rumors about how Mudryk was planning to drop football to switch to Olympic sprinting. And this narrative would spread fast, because I get it, the story is quite appealing. A naturally fast footballer trading a team sport for an individual event, mainly because right now he's not able to play football. However, the truth is, behind multiple reliable sources and Mudryk's legal team themselves have publicly refuted those claims, and stressing that he's not training with national athletic bodies to become an Olympic sprinter, causing major news outlets to retract those claims. Basically, it was fake news. So hey, I just thought I should defend Mudryk a little bit. But this all comes down to the big question. How bad was Mudryk in the Premier League? Personally, I feel like the problem wasn't that he lacked talent. It was more like he didn't understand how to use it efficiently. In his first full Premier League season, he scored just 5 goals and had 2 assists in 31 appearances. Very low numbers for a player who was expected to lead Chelsea's rebuild. Even without the price tag in mind, that was not a great season. But beyond the stats, the eye test told a harsher truth. Mudryk was great at getting into good positions. However, he would get there only to make the wrong decisions. He was shooting when he should pass, running into traffic, or simply having poor first touches. A lot of fans and analysts alike would argue whether his mistakes were technical or mental. Personally, I think it was a bit of a combination between both. For me, it felt like he was trying to play faster than he could think. And the data seems to back this up. A Sports Dark analysis found that within 5 seconds of receiving the ball, Mudryk lost possession 50 times across 807 minutes, roughly 5.5 times per 90 minutes, one of the highest among Premier League wingers. His crossing accuracy was sitting at around 19%, reflecting the same inconsistencies. A high volume of attempts, but few meaningful outcomes. And while he manages to get shots off regularly, most come from low-value positions. Or more simply, he's just shooting to shoot. Evidence of poor shot selection and an inability to turn chances into reliable production. However, it is unfair to say Mudryk's struggles were purely individual. Chelsea played a huge part, as they weren't all that great either. As Chelsea FC Analysis pointed out in their tactical breakdown, the club's lack of attacking cohesion has often stranded Mudryk on the left wing, without having any real overlapping support from fullbacks or coordinated movement inside. Basically, when a team attacks without rhythm, a winger who relies on instinct and space becomes isolated. Mudryk's biggest weapon, his electric pace, basically turns into over-dribbling and rushed attempts to force openings that aren't there. The same report also highlighted another issue of Mudryk's overall game: off-the-ball inconsistency. Because honestly, off-ball ability is one of the most underrated aspects of an attacking player. You got guys like Haaland and CR7 being called goal poachers and tap-in merchants, just because many fans don't have the ball knowledge to see how important off-ball movement is. But unfortunately for Mudryk, he's very poor at it. Not only is Mudryk's pressing and defensive tracking below the level demanded by typical Premier League systems, his positional awareness is just generally poor. Mudryk often left gaps behind him, forced his fullbacks into 2-on-1 situations, and this over time caused managers Pochettino and Maresca to trust him less. That's why after only 18 starts in 31 matches in the 23-24 season, Mudryk's minutes would drop significantly the following year. And mind you, this is all happening with the constant pressure of living up to his price tag, because even when given chances, Mudryk's confidence remained fragile. Every missed chance and every misplaced pass seemed to weigh heavier than the last. To his credit, there were flashes of brilliance, although incredibly brief. Ultimately, and unfortunately, Mudryk's story at Chelsea isn't just one of scandal, but also one of mismatch. Mismatch between talent and system, flair and structure. His downfall so far stems from decision-making lapses, erratic end product, and the frustrating inability to translate his raw athleticism into consistent, intelligent play. Until he finds a way to refine that into a controlled playstyle, Mudryk could never hope to improve in a top league. But who knows, maybe if he does leave Chelsea and plays for a smaller team, he'll lose all that pressure and maybe might regain some confidence. However, with those doping charges against him, his future seems incredibly uncertain. As hyped as Mudryk was and as quickly as he rose, his downfall would come even swifter. And I'm not here to say whether he's guilty or not, but either way, this catastrophic downfall of Mudryk is simply sad to see.